Let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I have been, this has been my entire career. Didn't really set out for that to be the case, but it has worked out that way. And I have worked for over 40 years in social services, primarily with children and families, um, also with substance abusers and children who have been runaways and throwaways. Children in foster care suffer post-traumatic stress disorder at 7 times the rate of veterans. And so that's how I come to this topic. I'm not an expert in trauma, and nor do I intend to be, and don't offer myself up as such, but I am someone who does deal with it in the job, and also am concerned with it in our staff who face this trauma on a daily basis, and it does produce secondary trauma. So I'll tell you a little bit about that journey, offer you a few thoughts. I am a graduate of the ECO Leadership Program at George Washington, which was a tremendous experience. And I'm also a student of dreaming and imagery, which I've been studying for about 10 years, and which really adds a lot to my ability to do these things and also to my understanding. And I'll circle back to that sort of at the end. But when you want to talk about trauma, it's a vast subject. We could really be here for a very long time talking about it. And it's a difficult subject because it involves pain and suffering. And we don't like to look at pain and suffering. We like to turn away from those things. But it is, as far as I can tell, an inescapable part of the human experience. It's probably one of the things that I would say we all have in common. At some point in our lives, we're going to suffer a trauma, or we're going to know someone close to us who's going to suffer a trauma, and that trauma is going to inflict some trauma on us as well as secondary people to it. So let me give you a little story of my own about trauma. Just to get you thinking, the best place to start always, I think, and if you really want to understand something, is to try to understand it within your own experience. So as I'm telling you this about myself, I'll invite you to think about how this might have played out in your life in some way. So this is my unexpected experience with trauma. This is not the only traumatic experience of my life, I promise you, but it's one that helps me make this point. So Rich was asking where I grew up. I grew up on the coast of Florida, South Florida, actually a little beach town about 2 miles from the beach named Dania. And growing up there, my parents had moved from New York State, and they were strangers to this climate, but they took the hurricane season very seriously. As a matter of fact, some of my best memories about my parents were how we dealt with hurricanes. And hurricanes were a frequent occurrence. I looked it up on Wikipedia, and there are more storms that hit Florida than any other US state. And since 1851, only 18 hurricane seasons have passed without a storm hitting Florida. So hurricanes were a part of life. I can count about 6 that I remember before I turned 10. And my parents, we lived in an older house, and they knew all the things. They would open the windows on different sides of the house to equalize the pressure, fill the bathtub with water, always have the food stores and the propane lamps handy for if the power went out. And there was never any fear about this. This was always a very matter-of-fact occurrence. And I remember they communicated that to me, that sense that this is a natural phenomenon. You can manage it if you pay attention. My mother taught us about the eye of the hurricane and not going out when it seemed to be over. So I give you all that background so that you know that hurricanes being something traumatic is not part of my childhood experience. So fast forward to 1991, I'm married. I have a young baby in arms. I have a new house that I've just moved into, and I'm responsible for a 78-bed residential facility. And here comes Hurricane Andrew. So I go up to Pompano, Florida, which is where the facility I was managing, to take care of that first. Came back to my home, which was in a place called Plantation, Florida. And this hurricane was hitting us, and we knew it was going to be really bad. And it's the first time and the only time I remember being afraid in a hurricane. And I was really afraid. The hurricane was forced to come at tremendous speed. Of course, if you know anything about it, it was tremendously devastating. It was forecast to go right over where we lived. At the last minute, after we lost communication, you didn't have any, information coming in. It veered off a little bit, and we were really spared. But I woke up the next morning to the TV images once we got our power back of all the places I knew in Miami that were just flat, completely devastated. And it was just a really devastating experience. So I put that behind me, went on, stayed in Florida. Many years later, August 2005, so this is 13 years later, I'm not living in Florida anymore. I'm in Tennessee, which is where I live now. And we had gone to vacation in Hilton Head, South Carolina. And here comes Hurricane Katrina, going to hit Louisiana. Didn't think too much about it. Put on the TV, and of course I would watch that coverage. And as I was watching it, the tears welled up in me, and I could not stop crying. The tears just rolled down my face for hours. It was crying out all those tears of what had happened with Hurricane Andrew all those years ago, hidden. Didn't really affect my day-to-day life. I didn't leave Florida because of Andrew, but it was there waiting. It needed to be released. It needed to be expressed. And so that's what trauma does. It stays in the body. It has to have its expression. It has to have its healing moment. So I'd encourage you to think about, can you relate to this in any way? Is there any type of trauma that you've experienced similar to that caught up with you at an unexpected moment? Or that you thought you were fine with until you tripped over something later on and suddenly you had an unexpected reaction, or something you weren't able to do, something that you normally could do easily. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, I know for me, I was very involved early on in the AIDS crisis, and then I was also involved with getting AIDS drugs to Africa. And it just seems like I'm not a particularly emotional person, but whenever I talk about this, particularly seeing baby coffins in Africa, it's stuck in my head. And so for some reason, it really evokes emotions many, many years later. So if I watch something about AIDS on a show or something, you know, and so that's something that I'm pretty aware of in my life.
Thank you. That's really great. And that's an example of secondary trauma. It didn't have to happen to you, but if you have an open heart and a caring heart, you're going to experience that trauma yourself, because out of care and empathy for the people that you care for. Anybody else? As caring people, it's really helpful for us to be able to identify this in ourselves. It doesn't have to be anything super deep, just something simple.
When I was 12 years old, my father died from a sudden heart attack. There was like no advance notice. So that's, in a way, has stuck with me for my whole life. But I did get past the feeling I had the morning after, which was, at that point, there was no reason to get up.
Yeah, sudden death, a sudden loss. It really pulls the rug out from under us. And even though we might be able to go on and put our lives back together, I can really resonate. I lost my father also unexpectedly, and time never seems to completely erase that sense of loss. Anyone else? Just for your own sake of locating this within your life, so you can, when we go on and discuss the rest of it, you have a place of reference within you. And you may not wish to share it. You may be able to think of it and just keep it in your mind as we go forward.
I was involved in an accident. It was one of these big trailer trucks on the highway, and the trailer truck actually ran over a car So the car was embedded under the truck. And I just missed getting killed by, you know, fractions of an inch. But all my life, I grew up with a fear of like big trucks. And I think that, I don't know if that was like something that was like a premonition of what was to come. But yeah, so I struggle with big trucks on the highway at high rates of speed.
Yeah.
Especially like toll booths and things like that, because I'm sure they're not going to stop and they're going to run right over me.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you for sharing that. It's very almost impossible to get through life without something like this happening to us. And our bodies retain those memories within them, and our psyches retain those memories within them. And unless they're addressed in some way, they can pop up. So I'm driving down the highway and big truck comes, and it's hard for me to keep my equilibrium. Or a hurricane comes 13 years later and I can't stop crying, or I see a film. Movies will do this a lot too. They'll evoke that memory of that traumatic event. So, that personal experience that I had back in 2005, at the time, I recognized it as a delayed reaction, but I would not have called it trauma. We've really come a long way in the last 5 to 10 years or so in recognizing trauma and the effect that trauma has. Now, our situation, we're particularly concerned with children with difficult behaviors. The work that we do and the work that I've done for all these years has really involved children who are struggling within their family situation. And over the decades, I've really seen the need for these children and their ability to be part of a family has become more and more challenging because of their behavior. So we're talking about children who will melt down for seemingly no reason at all. And this is very disruptive to their own families or to the families that are trying to care for them if they're foster families. And so we were seeing more and more of these children. They're actually ending up growing up in institutions because maintaining them in family settings is very challenging. And this was troubling to me. And it seemed to me that the interventions that we had just were not really meeting the needs of these children. And so we went looking for more effective interventions. And where we started actually was with safety. We started with a sense of felt safety for our staff. In this place and with these people, I feel safe. So we started with the staff, and then we looked for where are the interventions that we can find that are more effective, where we know more about what to expect, where we can move from a place of thinking about what is wrong with you to a place of asking, what happened to you? Starting with the assumption that the behavior is happening for a reason and understanding that that reason could have a lot to do with trauma. And in children, and I think this is true in adults too, the behavior is giving us a message that something needs attention, something needs healing. And that's why I asked you to sort of locate this within yourself first, because when you have these experiences yourself, it's a message. Something needs attention, something needs healing. So eventually, through many missteps and many adventures, we found our way to trauma systems therapy, which is the method that we're employing now. It's a really great approach because it focuses on the adults in the child's life. So it doesn't put the burden on the child. It talks to the adults and says, here's what you need to know, here's what's happening. There's even a curriculum for us to train parents and foster parents and school people and mental health professionals, anybody who's in a key role in a child's life, to never look away, to be present when that trauma is happening. And I think that approach is also good for each of us if we're approaching trauma in our own life. It's to turn and face it, find a way to be present to it, and if necessary, get some help. But we first realized that a lot of what we were seeing was trauma. And it's very phenomenological, the approach that we take. Phenomenology is just a big word for being present to what is. It's a big word for saying, I'm going to just look into my experience, or I'm going to listen to your experience and understand it the way you understand it. So first we realized it was trauma, that this is not, there's a diagnosis, oppositional defiant behavior. I think there's a lot of oppositional behavior going on that's really behavior that's saying, I've been traumatized, help me. We also began to recognize that what is a trauma response. We actually have a method that we employ that's called a moment by moment, where we just say what happened, and then what happened next, and then what happened next, and who saw what, and who felt what, and where was that trigger that we never imagined could have been there. So now we're able to respond more effectively. We're able to say, okay, we know what happened. Now we can do something with the lived environment to restore that sense of safety so that the brain can begin to heal and change. And then we're able to resist re-traumatizing. It's not hard to re-traumatize someone, especially a child who really doesn't have a lot of say in their environment. Anytime we push back, anytime we say, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing that? When a person is in that state, it can easily re-traumatize them because it reinforces this sense of I'm out of control, something's wrong with me. And so we help each other to become aware and equip ourselves and others to respond more appropriately. We don't have to be trauma experts. We do not have to be trauma experts. A few simple things really help with this. It's being present, fully present, not turning away. It's if I am working with someone and the trauma seems to be coming out, everything else stops. And I return the entire sense of control and choice to the person who's having that experience. It's just being present and just saying, what do you need right now? What would help you feel more calm or safe? And staying with them through that until they can reach the other side of it and come back to their normal state of equilibrium. So it doesn't take extreme expertise, but it does take being informed. And so I now understand, and these 4 R's that I've just walked you through, and the 3 E's I'm going to tell you about are developed by your neighbors down the street, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the Department of Health and Human Services. And I've included a link. They are doing a lot of great work with trauma. They've got a whole plan around it. It's a public health issue, and they're really approaching it in that way. It's really, really great stuff. It's a lot, so I distilled it for you. There's a little handout that you'll have after this. But if you think about trauma, it's an event. Something happens that produces an experience, and that's where the real crux of the matter is. It's somebody's experience, and each person's experience is uniquely their own. We may resonate to it, there may be commonalities, but you never know when somebody's going to experience something and it's going to become a trauma for them. We don't really know why that happens. We just know that it does, and that each person's experience is what it is. And then it has an effect sooner or later. In my case, 13 years later. In some cases, it goes on, and I have other traumas that have followed me to this day. But those 3 things have to be present for a trauma to really, I think it's a great way of understanding it, because the word is getting thrown around a lot, and it's really good to put some parameters on it. So some of the lessons that I've learned is that dreaming and imagery and trauma do relate. Everything we experience is data. There's a very interesting person named Otto Scharmer who does something that I learned about through the program at George Washington called the Presencing Institute. He talks about it being deep data, not big data, but deep data. Our bodies do inform us of what we need to know. And the adverse events, while they're unfortunate, they do offer opportunities for healing. I thought those verses were so wonderful. I hadn't seen them before, but I thought about what I was going to be saying when they were being read. And just feel the synergy and the synchronicity of that. And the more I know about my own experience, the more I'm able to be present to my own experience, the more present I can be to someone else. Because I will have looked into it, sorted it out, and it can resonate within me without causing such an effect that I can't pay attention to the other person. I have to pay attention to what's happening in me. And that unconditional presence itself is healing. It's not the only thing that's needed sometimes, but it sure is powerful. And so just that being able to be still, not turn away from the pain, can be very, very healing. This is tough. I still grapple with the why. I've spent a lot of years working with innocent children who've suffered unimaginably. But the more I grow spiritually, the better equipped I am to be present to mystery and to trust in that mystery and in that healing that you pointed to in those beautiful passages, that miracle that can occur if we believe. Also, Jesus was present to those men. He didn't turn away from their blindness. So we see it in that example. And that through dream work, I learned that everything can be corrected. The method of dreaming that Katerina's been privy to, and they teach in the George Washington School that I studied also elsewhere, teaches us that our dreams show us what needs attention and also gives us tools to make those corrections. And so if that can happen with our dreaming life, it can happen in our waking life as well. And that is what I have to say today. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I appreciate your attention. I feel the warmth and feel very supported as I've been talking. So thank you very much for this chance to talk to you.
Well, thank you for those words of wisdom on a very pertinent topic. And it's our tradition that if for people to ask questions and or comments at this time, if that's okay with you, Kate.
Yeah.
And I have one just that comes to my mind. I'll kick it off. If anybody else has them, please let me just raise your hand. But so I meet a number of people who have trauma, adults, and the way they would describe it is they're stuck in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can't seem to move forward. And then that often leads to career not working out, work not working out. And then that has a lot of repercussions, right? Because there's no income. And then you're kind of like, can't pay your rent, can't pay your car payment, and it just spirals. And then the next thing you know, they lost their car, now they're looking for a place to live. But if they would identify it, they'd say there was a trauma and they're just stuck. And they would say they're very smart people. They can see it from the outside, but they just can't break out of this stuckness. Have you ever experienced that? And I wonder if you have, what advice would you have for somebody who says like, yes, I had trauma and I am stuck. I'm spinning my wheels.
Yeah, yes, I've experienced it, actually have it in my family. People struggle with this and it can lead to this loop, this self-fulfilling kind of a loop of, I want to do better. I make a little effort, I fail, and then it reinforces that this isn't for me. I can't have it. And it relates back to this trauma that I have. Mm-hmm. I think that, and what you're describing it's a difficult situation because the help that's available costs money, or you have to have insurance to get it, and so forth and so on. So I do think that interrupting that cycle is really important, and finding people who can mutually support one another in that presence to one another can be very helpful with it as well. So, finding some part of that cycle that can be interrupted, the lowest hanging fruit, and then building from there, and knowing that trauma doesn't need to define us. I think that is the downside of our recognition of trauma, is that a lot of people have taken it on as a mantle, you know, and my identity. And also the reason I'm stuck here, and that is true at that level, but it's also necessary to take some steps and make some changes, find some support. And often people who can, mutual support groups can be very, very helpful for those things. So I hope that's helpful.
That's very helpful. I think breaking the loop is the tricky part.
Yeah, it's finding that the thing that I think that I can manage to try just once, and then trying it again, and then continuing to build from there. But depending on the trauma and depending on how long that loop has been going on, it can be very, very daunting. If you have any way to organize some, some group interactions for people, some mutual support groups, those can be very helpful and very cost effective.
Excellent. Thank you. I have more questions, but I want to open it up if other people have any thoughts or questions.
You made reference to the traumatized individual as feeling out of control. But I know, like, when I get on the highway, I'm very much in control. But everybody else on the highway is out of control, in my opinion. So it's not that I'm out of control, it's the rest of the world is out of control.
Yeah, and I think that's a good distinction. It's their out of controlness that might wreck your ability to get where you're going. So it's that you can't control them and the irresponsible or problematic driving that they might have, and the catastrophic event that might occur from that.
Yeah. I mean, even I hate to fly, but when I have to fly, I don't understand why I can't drive the plane, because I want that control.
Exactly. And that's what I mean by, I said out of control. I'm not in control.
Yeah.
I don't really control my fate.
Yes, I'm not in control. I like that. Natasha, you have your hand up.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Kate, for your presentation and more for your work that you do. I can imagine it's amazing and necessary and really challenging work, I can imagine. I have a question. You mentioned miracle of healing. Can you provide an example of this miracle of healing that you experience with a child or children?
Oh, I really can't get into too much specifics because of the confidentiality involved, but I can say that when we recognize the trauma triggers and we can relieve the child of those triggers, that they can begin then to experience safety. And once they start to experience safety, it is really miraculous. They really can. And we do see at Gateway on a regular basis children getting adopted, children who have aged out of foster care really getting jobs and getting a successful life started. We we start all of our meetings with trying to talk about those wins, so that we can remind ourselves that those things are possible and they do happen. When we get it right, when we are able to figure that out and we can get the adult to cooperate and to recognize and it's small things that people take personally when a child is triggered by someone who means well and is doing what they think is the right thing, and it's nothing you would think anything of even, and yet the child is melting down. That is very upsetting. So when we can get them to step back from that and recognize that this small thing, whatever it is, if they can change that thing, then the child can begin to experience that safety. So much of this takes place in the brain. The part of the brain that is the older part that is reactive and kept us alive when we were surviving, you know, tigers and lions eating us, gets overactivated with chronic stress and trauma. And so the thinking part, which is the older part of the brain, gets less used, and so it kind of shrinks. And so what you want to do is get that lower part to stand down a little bit so the thinking part can begin to develop more. And it really is, it can be quite miraculous.
Okay, thank you. So, you mentioned it's achieved by being present, by talking to children and being like kind to them. Is that the way?
Yes, it's having just that unconditional positive, I'm here with you, I see you, I hear you. What's happening with you? What do you need? Often getting down on the child's level, looking at them right in their eyes, seeing do they need something to eat or drink. A lot of times when a child is getting out of control, they're hungry or thirsty. Or is there some other small thing that would really help them calm down and settle down? And letting that be the first thing, letting go of all the power struggles that tend to happen around that right in those moments.
Thank you.
Yeah. If you're interested in knowing more as an adult, there is a training for this. Gateway offers it, and also our partners at New York University offer it. It's called Never Look Away. And if you want to know more about that, you can, Katerina has my contact information. You can reach out to me and we can either hook you up with a training Gateway is going to do or one that New York University is going to do. It's a whole curriculum that you go through and really learn all these steps. It's much more than I can do in 20 or 30 minutes.
Thank you.
And is that offered over Zoom?
It is offered over Zoom. A lot of what we're doing in Birmingham is going to be in person, but New York is doing theirs. And there's a small cost for it, but it's a very worthwhile training. We're just beginning to roll it out. Yes, Karen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
My question was, what practices do you instill in your staff to build that sense of community and a safe space that we can learn from as a church? And is dream work a part of what you do with your community?
Yeah, thank you for that lovely softball question, Katerina. We are so excited to be instituting the circles that we learned at George Washington with our staff, which is where we come together in a small circle and just are in service to one member for that one session and just are in that space of being present, asking questions to clarify what we need to know to really understand that person's experience, and then resonate and reflect back to the person what we have experienced along with them, and then begin to start to open out new possibilities for what might be possible once we've stepped back from the situation and begun to see it from different perspectives. We're in our third round of those circles with Gateway staff now, and it's really been tremendous. And we do bring the dreaming and the imagery into it. We're not quite at the level of opening dreams, but we're teaching the beginning imagery practices, a breathing technique that is not too dissimilar from what you started out with, but it goes a little further and gets us in touch with our bodies. And some of those other techniques for clearing things away that are starting to accrue when we're doing this work. And we're getting great feedback from the staff. So thank you. I did want to tell about that, and it's been very exciting.
Yeah, I really do love that idea. That practice is something that the church community could do if people are interested. You do have to make a commitment. You can't just show up for your session and then not show up for somebody else's. But I think that's a great idea. The other quick observation, I don't have to be a big question, but so Swedenborg, who was the thinker leader of thought for our denomination, wrote the first really journal of dreams. This is like so he kept one. I keep one myself. It's a very common, it's much more of a mystical tradition. And so dreams play an important role. And I'm just fascinated to hear the incorporation of dreams into this work, because I think they've been so dismissed by modern secular culture as just the brain cleansing itself from what it needs to do from the day and so forth. But I'll just say as another practice for people, if you keep a dream journal over time, mine has been quite prophetic, quite amazing stories. I've shared these in various sermons over time, but there is something to dreams spiritually. And was really pleased to hear you mention that coming into working, helping people. So.
Well, let me say that that's a whole other story, and I would be more than thrilled to come back and tell it to you another time.
I think it would be very well received in our group. I think we're very open to that. I know I am personally. So thank you for that. If there's not another hand up, we're going.
We have someone in the chat.
There is
Oh, in the chat. I'm sorry. Yeah. And Jose has his hand up, and then there's something in the chat. So let's go to the chat first. And the chat is, have you found that some people don't seek help because they are embarrassed to let others know that they're having difficulty? What would be the best way to help someone that needs help but doesn't want any? That's a great question.
Yeah, it's a really lovely question. And of course, it is very, very common for people to be embarrassed. We get this message that we should be perfect and we should just be able to roll through anything. And if we're stumbling or having any trouble at all, there must be something wrong with us. And so I think that, in keeping with what we're talking about, the best way is to be present to that person and reflect back to them. So how is this for you not to be able to get help? What's that like? What might make a difference with that? Or what would happen if you were able to get, where would you like to get with this? And just get them to sort of open out, as opposed to telling them what they need to do, because people tend to push back against that, as they just do. But rather being present to it, resonating to the pain and the shame that is present there, and then just asking, what might you learn that would help you with this? Or what would it be like if you were able to do something different about this? And just leave them with it. Trusting, we all have the life force in us, and it always wants to heal and grow. And that is no truer anywhere than with children.
Great. Jose, I see your hand up.
Hi, this is Katie.
Katie.
First, Kate, thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it, and thank you for all the work that you do. I know that it's really hard work. I had more of a question that's more like maybe like an action step. Like, I work with children myself, and I've always wanted to like help children who are maybe in foster care, who don't have like permanent residence, but I've never been in a place to like really foster a child or anything like that. Do you know if there are any ways that like as individuals or maybe as a church community, we could help children who are in foster care, maybe not like through fostering, but through a different way?
There are lots of ways to help. You don't have to foster to help. You can support a foster family. You can be in touch with the organizations that are working in this space, wherever you are, and ask them what they need. Do they need things? Do they need support? Do they need their staff to be celebrated? One thing about children's services, they're radically underfunded. They actually, is because the organizations that work with children started doing it before the government got involved. There's this sense that we should just bring our private dollars to the table, and the government should just be able to co-opt those. So that you can bet that those organizations are always going to need more. And you can write encouraging notes. You can babysit. You can get yourself trained to understand trauma and the secondary effects of trauma. There's a lot that can be done. A lot. And you can be a messenger. There's a whole campaign for people to understand more about kids in foster care and just tell other people what those realities are like. So the more people know, the more informed they are, the better maybe we can put pressure for better policies for families and children. There's a lot.
Thank you.
And Roxanne, you have your hand up.
Yeah. I've done a bit of training in chaplaincy, and there's the concept of the wounded healer. And that is sort of delving into your own traumas. Not that your trauma becomes, you know, center stage, but it's like delving in your trauma to learn how to harvest skills of empathy, etc., to be present, to be able to be present with that individual who has been traumatized. I'm just wondering if you're familiar at all with the concept of the wounded healer.
I have not studied that particular theme, but
Mhm.
it's certainly very important to what we do. And it's interesting as we're trying to do these circles with Gateway, with the people who come into them, and the people who have the hardest time with them are the therapists. So I think that's exactly what you're talking about. I think it's people who are doing the therapy, but they haven't really fully looked within. And so it's very hard to really be present to someone else when you haven't been first present to yourself. So that's what I get from what you said. It is not a topic that I have actually studied, the wounded healer, but it certainly sounds like it applies.
Yeah, I mean, I like the first year of my chaplaincy training, it was all about just deconstructing yourself. You know, you go through this, it's a rather painful process of just deconstructing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what's there. And
And it's actually all of our mission anyway, isn't it? To become the person we were born to be. So we have to know who we are and what is holding us back and where those things happened and what do we need to do about them.
yeah.
And I could also recommend the book by Henry Nouwen, who is my spirituality teacher at Harvard Divinity School, who wrote The Wounded Healer. And it kind of,
Oh,
it's a really great book. Malcolm, you're going to get the last question.
Okay, well, I've never engaged in deconstruction of myself so far as I know, but drawing on the trauma, or at least the grief that I felt when my wife passed away more suddenly than anticipated, I found that some of the ways that I found in coping with the grief could be used to help others through similar grief. And in helping them, I did indeed help myself deal with my continuing grief. So I do find a great deal of truth in that thought.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thank you, Malcolm.
That is a great example, and that's a great lesson. If we get outside of ourselves sometimes and just seek to serve others and help others, it can also completely heal and be very healing in our own life. So it's a great example, and I've watched Malcolm do that with many people who have suffered loss of a spouse, and it's been very powerful. So thank you, Kate. Not only were there great words of wisdom, but you inspired an incredible conversation, which is always the sign of a really provocative presentation. So we really appreciate that, and we really appreciate the work that you're doing. It is it's very heroic, and it's not the heroes that our culture celebrates, but it is the heroes our culture should celebrate, because you're really transforming and saving people's life and their trajectory. So thank you for all the work you're doing, Kate. I know you're very humble about it, but it's extremely appreciated for what you're doing. Thank you.